The litany of allegations continued to grow this week as more and more women came forward charging powerful men with sexual misconduct. It has sparked a national conversation from Hollywood to Capitol Hill in corporate boardrooms and kitchen tables all across the country. The question now, will all this talk bring real change?
And he just mashed his lips against my face, and he stuck his tongue in my mouth.
Leanne Tweeden says that happened on a USO tour back in 2006, before Al Franken was a senator. Just the latest in a series of disturbing stories.
I remember the lurch when I went to the desk and I said, Mr. Weinstein, is he on the patio? And they said, he's in his room. And I was like, ugh, are you kidding me?
I am a victim of sexual abuse. Like, it's really not an easy thing to let yourself believe that.
In the wake of this wave, the promise of action.
There is a renewed recognition, rightfully, of this problem and the need for a change of culture that looks the other way because of who the offenders are. Whether it's Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, Bill O'Reilly, Mark Halperin, Roger Ailes, Kevin Spacey, or one of our own, it's time to say no more.
But we've heard that before. Look at this headline from 1975.
My name is Anita F. Hill.
In 1991, Time magazine touted America's watershed debate on sexual harassment.
Judge Thomas and the woman who accuses him of sexual harassment, Professor Anita Hill, have both been called to testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee.
1995, Senator Bob Packwood resigned after charges of sexual misconduct.
It's time for Senator Packwood to leave, and I think the sooner he leaves, the better it is for him, the better it is for the Senate.
1998, Bill Clinton impeached for lying about his sexual relationship with a young intern.
Indeed, I did have a relationship with Ms. Lewinsky that was not appropriate. In fact, it was wrong.
And just last year, Donald Trump confronted by more than a dozen women after he bragged about groping.
And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the you can do anything.
So is this a watershed moment, or will it pass like so many before? Let's talk about that with our panel. Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, former Congresswoman Mary Bono of California, Carly Fiorina, who was CEO of Hewlett-Packard, ran for president last year, and Ronan Farrow, who's written some blockbuster stories for The New Yorker this month. Thanks to all of you for being here. And Congresswoman Norton, let me begin with you. You were also the first female chair of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and their latest report reminds us that this is not just an issue for the rich, the famous, the powerful. It happens in every workplace in America, and most women are afraid to come forward.
Most women are afraid to come forward, and it's even more difficult, interestingly, to come forward in the hallways of the rich and the powerful because they are so powerful. Because they are so powerful, it is one woman against one very powerful man. But what we have seen here may be a watershed moment because we are seeing many women, for example, in the Roy Moore matter, many women against one man, and that's what we need. This Me Too that is now encompassed not only Congress, but all through the society may encourage more women understanding that there are strength in numbers.
Congresswoman Bono, this is something you experienced in Congress.
That's right, I did, but you know, there's a whole gradient scale here on sexual harassment on up to sort of inappropriate comments. So in my case, I was just on the receiving end of inappropriate comments on the floor of the House of Representatives that I needed to just, you know, say to my colleague, that's not cool, knock it off. But it took a while for me to find my voice in order to say that.
And you were a member of Congress.
And I was a member of Congress. So in my case, this was a peer. But even peers, you know, in that case, it was sort of, it wasn't sexualizing me necessarily. It was more about taking me down a notch in the eyes of my colleagues. So, you know, again, sexual harassment takes many, many forms.
Carly Fiorina, I see you nodding your head to that. And you had a powerful Facebook post out this morning. You said you started out as a secretary almost 40 years ago, traveled the corporate ladder from the very bottom to the very top. I know this stuff happens because it has happened, still happens to me.
Yes, and I think to answer your original question, will this be a watershed moment? It will only be a watershed moment if men decide to step forward. Women have been stepping forward, as you point out, for a really long time. What needs to happen now is the guys need to man up. The guys who know this is happening, look, most men are good, decent, respectful men, but enough men are not, and all the other men around them know they are not. The truth is, about every single one of these stories, whether it's Harvey Weinstein or Roger Ailes, it doesn't matter who it is, everybody knew. The women knew, and especially the men knew. And so I think it's men's turn now to say, you know what, we're not going to respect someone who disrespects women. And when that starts to happen, if that starts to happen, then we will have reached a watershed moment, when it's not just about the amazing and scandalous headlines, but when actually the men who choose to abuse or disrespect women are confronted by another man who chooses not to let it go.
And Ronan Farrow, you've written these stories for The New Yorker. More are coming as well. One of the first things you see is the men not only deny in the face of those first questions, they do everything they can to quash that story.
Everything they can, and there's a system around those men, George, that enables them to quash the stories. This, I think, is at the heart of this question of, is it a watershed moment? Not just are people brave enough to come forward, but are we all as a society brave enough to actually confront the reforms necessary to the system? I mean, Jackie Spear just came out in the last few days and said Congress has paid tens of millions of dollars in settlements over the last, several decades. Now, what we need to see in terms of reform is exactly what legislators are already putting on the table around the country. Limitations on the use of secret settlements, for instance, that silence these allegations. Are we going to be able to actually change that? That's an open question.
Congresswoman Holmes Norton, I think that did surprise a lot of people. Now, we're not sure how many of those settlements were actually about sexual harassment, but millions paid out over the last 20 years in secret.
All settlements are secret, and that's typical of the system. But look, there wasn't even the kind of training is the wrong word for it, exposure to what sexual harassment is that is required in the federal sector and the private sector. Yet there's a 30-minute veto that can let you know what sexual harassment is. We weren't required to do that. I sent a letter and asked members to join me in sending a letter saying we don't have to wait for Congress to say. Everybody, every member of Congress and every staff member has to look at this video because, George, I am convinced that many women even may not understand what some unwelcome advances are, and that they don't have to welcome them, or they can turn them away, or they can say, you're not supposed to do this. That might stop some men. But at the very least, Congress has to be put on the same footing as the other branches of government and as the private sector.
That seems to make a lot of sense. Congresswoman Bono, you knew how to handle it for yourself as a peer, as you said, but there are a lot of young staffers on Capitol Hill.
You're right, George. And, to kind of piggyback on what Carly is saying, it's not just about the men. Look, we all knew it's the culture of Capitol Hill. We all know it's the culture of Hollywood. Women, too, I think we gave up the fight. And I think we started saying, as long as I'm okay, I'm not going to worry about everybody else. Seriously, it's a cultural, very deeply rooted problem. And the women, too, we have to learn to empower our younger staffers on the Hill. We have to, empower people in Hollywood. But, women, too, have to step up, because I actually realized that, my silence was part of the problem, too, on the Hill. So it's not just the men. We all have to step in and change this now and truly make it a watershed moment.
Carly Fiorina, perhaps step up at the ballot box as well. You now got Roy Moore now on the ballot in Alabama in the face of these 7 new allegations. What the White House said this week about President Trump is that the election answered those questions about the allegations against him.
Well, and Democrats would say that, President Clinton's popularity answered those questions. And I think the problem is we politicize this always, and it gets to be a question of our team versus their team. Look, again, for every Republican who's behaved badly, and Roy Moore certainly has, and I clearly believe these women, and I think he should step aside, and he won't. But for every Republican who's behaved badly, there's a Democrat who's behaved badly. For every famous man who's behaved badly, there's someone we've never heard of who is behaving badly right now. It cuts across every industry and every walk of life. It's in athletics, it's in coaches, it's in the churches, it's everywhere. Again, most men are good and decent and respectful men, but enough men are not. And so we just have to decide, women and men, that this truly is not to be enabled, it's not to be excused, and in particular, that a man does not deserve respect from other men if he is disrespectful to women.
Powerful point you're making right there. Ronan Farrow, you get the last word right here. Women came forward after years to tell stories to you, the New York Times, and other news outlets. Where does it go next?
Look, we're going to see multiple law enforcement agencies attempt to pick up where I think a lot of police officers feel the ball was dropped in the case of Harvey Weinstein. But, you know, as Carly Fiorina says, this is much bigger than just politics, than just Hollywood. This is about the abuse of power. And I have now spent a year of women telling me that they felt there was a power imbalance that kept their allegations silent. And so I think we're all going to be looking at that as a society.
Thank you all very much. Important conversation.